view, or which, if you have basically many pages within one page, trying to show complicated states with the router with that was provided with Angular 1 was fairly limited. So it only really supports showing one view or one controller at a time. Pretty much everybody usually gets around this by using the UI router, which is a third-party project. So there's all these different things included with the Angular 1 framework. You've got controllers, directives, components, views, which kind of are all related. And then in yellow here, services and factories, which are very similar as well, and then routes. So it was there was a lot of evolution happening from when this was first released, I think only 2 or 3 years ago.
It's about 6
or 7. Okay. So here's a very opinionated comparison that I've made. So as far as why to use one over the other, Angular 1 is probably, if you need to quickly prototype something, Angular 1 is, at least for me, seems to be a little faster to develop on, a little bit less complex. Angular 2, as I'll talk about in the next slide, I think it's going to give you better performance. I think it's going to give you, as far as avoiding bugs and things like because of type checking with TypeScript, etc. And then Angular 1 is the more stable because Angular 2 hasn't really even been officially released yet. As far as third-party widget support, Angular 1 is far and away has a lot more graphical elements that you can download off the web and use than Angular 2. As far as maintainability, for once a project goes to any real size, and again, this is opinionated, I think you're going to see Angular 2 is probably going to be more maintainable. So we'll get into why. So Angular 2, right? So we've been talking about Angular 1. It's not a incremental change, not even a large change. It's almost a complete rewrite of Angular 1. There are upgrade paths, which I'm sure all the Angular 1 people are interested about here. Basically, any directives that you have or controller and views that you have, you're supposed to convert them to the component object, which exists in Angular 1 already in the 1.5 release. One thing to watch out for is if you're watching for changes on objects right now with scope.watch, the component method on changes is not exactly the same thing. It only looks at, it doesn't do deep inspection into objects. So if you have a complex object with multiple layers inside of it, or like an array, and you just change one attribute or one element inside, it won't trigger an onChanges event like scope.watch will. So there's a workaround here that I'm actually using right now that should work to get around that. You can do hybrid apps, so you can have half or 4/5 of your application be Angular 1, and then slowly convert it over to Angular 2 using things like ng upgrade. I haven't really played with that myself, so I can't speak to how easy or not that is. So Angular 2 pretty much is the future, but Google said that they'll pretty much do parallel support with Angular 1 as long as there's a sizable community of people using it. And there better here. And Angular 1 is that Washington Monument there in the middle, whereas Angular 2 is the blue box there. So you can see Angular 2 is much more in line with other modern frameworks for web development. So it's smaller because it has a build step. It can actually go through and weed out parts of included libraries that aren't being used specifically by your app. So it can greatly reduce the size of the dependencies that people have to download. Also faster processing. It's cross-platform. So Angular 1 was largely designed to run in a web browser, and while that's probably the most common platform for Angular 2, it's also designed from the get-go for mobile OSs, and there's actually different rendering backends that you can use for it. So you can actually use it to design native iOS, Android, PC, or Mac applications, and you can bundle that using Ionic or NativeScript are a couple of examples. I think there's 2 or 3 other ones too that you can use. So you can write, you can have one code base that you can deploy, maintain across all of those environments. The downside is, at least in my experience, has been that it's a little bit more complex. So it does, because of it being largely TypeScript, it kind of feels like you're writing C++ more than JavaScript. As far as dependencies as well, because it pretty much requires a build step locally on your development server to bundle up all of the source code and everything. You pretty much have to have Node.js and npm installed on your development workstation.
One quick thing about that. Angular 2 itself is less complex than Angular 1, but all the environmental stuff that comes along with it makes it feel more complex. So if you're just trying to learn Angular 2, you already knew TypeScript, you already had a build step, you had all these things already that you're already doing. Angular 2 is going to be so much easier because you don't have all those various things that you mentioned before, factories, controllers. You just have classes, and that's it. But if you haven't been doing like kind of modern JavaScript applications, it's going to be like an avalanche of, you've got to build tasks, and now you have a TypeScript, and you have System.js or Webpack and all these other things that you're going to have to now kind of deal with to some degree. And I think you'll talk about some of the ways they're trying to improve that later. But just want to make sure everyone understands it's not really Angular, so you don't have the same problems if you do React or Ember or any of the other modern frameworks. It's kind of the weight that comes along with all the modern JavaScript frameworks.
And another thing is, if you don't know TypeScript, most of the documentation and examples for Angular 2 is in TypeScript. They are trying hard to also support JavaScript, but most of the most modern stuff out there is going to be TypeScript, and I think it's, for what it gives you, it's probably worth the pain to learn it. But the downside is that JavaScript isn't as well documented as the TypeScript examples for Angular 2. So TypeScript is basically, according to the language website, it's a superset of JavaScript that compiles to plain JavaScript. So for instance, JavaScript variables can be set to any type at any time, an integer, a string, a float. TypeScript allows you to enforce variable types, so you can actually, if you create a class object of a particular type, you can say this variable should only ever be this class object type. So, and then it can throw different warnings at compile time, ahead of time, if there's a path that would allow you to unintentionally, put some other illegal value in there. So it does give you a lot of safety in that regard. Yeah, it's basically a superset of JavaScript. So if you can read JavaScript, you can pretty much read all of TypeScript. It supports a lot of the newer JavaScript ES6, or I guess they're calling it ES 2015 standards, so that you can write in a newer version of a language, and then they have basically wrapper code that lets it run on older versions of browsers that don't support the latest features of JavaScript. So, no browsers natively, at least as far as I know, No browsers natively support TypeScript, so it's always compiled into JavaScript to be run in the browser. So yeah, because it can do type checking, I think you're going to find that it's going to help you avoid a lot of bugs in the future, because it can catch them at compile time as well as at runtime. One downside to writing in one language and then having it compiled to JavaScript is sometimes it can be harder to debug in the browser. So if you use a minifier, which I think the method that I'm going to show you today does, you can still debug TypeScript in the browser. So you can do
Source map.
yeah, like it's using a source map to show you the currently executing step in TypeScript, even though it's actually running JavaScript underneath, and then you can actually step through the code as well. So, and if any of you are doing any kind of web development with any framework, and you aren't using a minifier of some kind, you really should be using a minifier like Uglify.js or Google Closure. So Angular 2, should probably be using Node, at least Node 4 or higher. 6 is probably just fine to use, especially if you're just starting development on a new project that'll take a couple months to get deployed. There's an example command to upgrade NPM, because I found that I've avoided a lot of issues by doing that. The tool that I've used to get started with Angular 2 is the Angular command line interface, which is an NPM module that you can install. And the bleeding edge here is the Webpack version of this, which takes care of a lot of the details of bundling style sheets and images and other extra items that you need for a web page that NPM doesn't, as a package manager, doesn't handle for you. But that's still pretty new. So here's an example of how to start a new project. Once you've installed those dependencies, you use ng, new project name, cd to the project folder, and then serve it. And then you can open your web browser to that path, and then you can start to make changes and test. So for instance, so here's just examples of what I'm going to do here in a second, so maybe I'll just jump over. But what it does is by letting you generate what the Angular command line interface does is it has these commands that generate a lot of the boilerplate code for you, so you can easily jump into. So you can, if you want a new component, you do ng. The G is a shortcut for generate. The type, I want to generate a component, and then I have the name of the component that I want to generate, and then you just have a couple steps to import it to get it into your application. So it offers pretty much the kitchen sink of tools for most of the common types of things that you would want to generate, like a service, a component. I think it'll also do factories and someday routes, although right now it doesn't. For debugging issues, I found that sometimes I had to bounce between ngserve, which is the development view, and ngserve production. So here, I'll jump over real quick. So here's a proverbial hello world project that I've generated. And so here's kind of the skeleton of what it generated for me when I did ng new. So it gives me an end-to-end testing folder for end-to-end tests. It also has a dist folder, which is where your distributables would go generally once you push to the server. Node modules are your NPM dependencies, and then it gives you your README, your dependency list, and version locking. And then since this is using TypeScript, it has your typings and your lint settings for your TypeScript linter. Okay, so since I have it already generated, I'm going to do an ng-serve from this, and it's going to build the project. All right. So now I can go to the project here, and oh, great, app works. All right. Now, what's cool about this is I can develop live. Oh, that's what I wanted to open. I can develop live, and let's go here. So, all right. So, for instance, here's the template for my component.
Can you explain what a component is? Because I think that's kind of like central to.
Okay. See, I'm going to have trouble explaining a component.
So everything in Angular 2 is based on a component. Think of a component like a widget. It's like your directive from, if you're familiar with Angular 1, it's like the directive. But now you get that saying turtles all the way down. Like it's components all the way down. Like your app itself is a component, which inside of it would have other components. So let's say you had a view or you had something that you want to do. Everything is a component going all the way down. So you'll see component a lot, and when he says generate a component, that's what he means. So it could be generating the first component, which is your entire app, or it could be generating like a new widget that you want to do, and that's going to be a component. So just think about it as understanding that it's components all the way down is important to the layout and how things work and why you're generating these things. What goes along with it, because you'll see he has app.component.css, app.component.html, app.component.ts, app.component.spec. These are all things wrapped in the component, like the test file, the view, the CSS that goes along with it, the JavaScript that goes along with it. It's all centralized around this idea of a component.
Yeah, so actually I guess I'll build it up so you can see. So we're loading the index page, which has this app root tag, which is very similar to Angular 1. We've defined basically a custom tag that we basically, our component takes over that tag and renders its content there, and that's what you're seeing here. So then we look at the main app component has this HTML template where we're saying, okay, grab the title attribute from my component and render it. And here we can see that it's setting title to AppWorks. So that's what we're seeing here on the page, AppWorks. So if I change this now to Hello World and I save it, it'll recompile and throw it up there live.
Recompile every time?
Yeah,
only the file that changes or everything?
Only the file that changes. So it should.
Like really slow,
yeah, I think I'm fairly certain it does incremental builds. So what I've done is I've created. Okay, I want to create another component inside that this component calls. Right. So I've created a component called myRandomNumber, which all it does is just call math.random and throw it into. Here's an example of TypeScript, by the way. In my class, I've said random number has to be of type string. So if you try to assign it anything but a string, it will actually throw an error. At compile time. All right. So here's the template for that. So I'm saying, okay, random number works. Throw it in this template here. And so all I have to do is I have to import my new component into my main component here. And then I have to tell it about the directives. The directives are the basically that new tag that it should know about. And then if I save this, yep. Now you can see.
Angular 1 directives is just
Yeah.
still kick out.
So
I'm getting close.
What version are you running? What? If you go to 1.5.8, you can use components in Angular 1. I'm switching all my
Right.
directives to components.
But again, the only caveat is if you're using a lot of watches, okay.
Hopefully we're not.
Okay.
Yeah, I try to code
We try
around
to
those.
code
around
sort of thing, yeah.
But I mean that's yeah, and you can do you can create services. So I mean that's pretty much at least what I have for this demo. But
Okay, so I have a question.
Okay.
I apologize, it's a totally dumb question, because I don't know anything about this. That title, like, does that mean that if you added another variable in there, that it would suddenly sort of be, like, what is the scope of these, like, how do you associate title with this component, but not your for loop, like your for loop?
okay. Well, yeah, right here, what I'm doing is I'm basically declaring this this variable right here. So I could declare any other variable I wanted. So I could have, you know, variable 2 equals something, right? And then if I save this, well, nothing's really going to happen yet. But I could go into, so basically that's all I had to do to declare a new variable inside my component. And then if I want to show that on the page, I just have to go into my template and say, okay, I want to show, no, I completely, variable 2, right? No, actually do this. I can never remember which way this goes.
Right. Yeah. Right.
We're going to just ignore
This
it all
one.
together.
Yeah. So if I save that, it detects that that's there, and now it automatically shows that on the page.
So behind the scenes, TypeScript is doing some stuff for you. Like when you put that
Yeah.
in the class, it's generating some JavaScript that will actually expose that out of that class as well. So it's like it's creating an IIFE and then giving you access to that variable outside of it as well. So there's like constructors in there as well. There's other things you can do.
About
Very
private,
much like Java or
what
C
about
Sharp.
private members?
Yeah. Private.
Yep. So for instance, I can say,
That's how it does. Okay.
yep. Now it might actually error here. Let's see if it might be fine because it's being rendered by the object itself. But if I tried to get to this from the other component, I think it would throw an error. I haven't tried that yet.
Should be at scope. So, I got a question. So, this looks like a lot of C++ stuff, but I would say that so you can generate the same HTML page here, and this was portable enough to put in the iOS app.
Yeah.
So that'd be useful.
Yeah, I think you still do you still define your GUI based on HTML. I think.
So it depends on which one you go with. Like if you go with NativeScript, then your UI layer, your HTML, it's not going to be HTML. It's going to be like this XML format. But it's just like saying open tag button, and it'll translate that button to a native iOS button if you're running iOS.
So if
and
you're
native.
using Objective-C or Swiftly, you can go to this pretty easily and make it portable.
I don't.
I don't know. Like, because all your logic would be in Swift or Objective-C, and
Right.
that's a totally different paradigm from
Right.
JavaScript.
Yeah, I just do you know of anybody that uses this for app development?
I don't know even personally that I know of a lot of people that are doing it in industry.
Are they? Yeah. Because I would think the major share is still Swift, you know, and obviously Java for Android.
Yeah, I think that's going to shift a bit, just because before, if you're trying to do JavaScript development, most of the time you had to do it through a web view, and you end up losing some performance.
Yeah.
But now with React Native, NativeScript, you're getting your JavaScript is compiling natively on the platform, so you're getting native performance, but you're able to take that same code base and and deploy it across iOS, Android, and the other platform that shall not be named.
I don't know for sure, but I strongly suspect you'd be able to, if there's any kind of library linking scheme, that when you deploy to iOS, you probably should be able to call into the library that you've created with Swift or one of those languages. But the main attractiveness of this is that you can have one development team support however many platforms. Like you can have a website and a.
That's what I'm trying to get around. Is that dependency, developing too many platforms. So I'd like to be able to develop an app and have it work on my web page.
Right. The holy grail is what you said. Like, and it's not going to be. I don't think we'll get there. For sure. Maybe we will, but you can have one core business logic layer, and you may have to have separate, slightly different UIs because the paradigms are quite different. Or you can just say, hey, our app is important enough that we don't care about the paradigm of the platform you're on. It just works this way, like Facebook and that sort of stuff.
So if you knew nothing about Angular 1, which is me, this is probably pretty easy to get into.
Yeah, it's a lot easier if you don't know Angular 1.
Yeah, all these assumptions of like, no, stop.
Yeah.
Do you feel like Angular 1 will eventually become obsolete, or do you think they'll continue to run at the same time?
I don't know. I mean, there's still because it's so radically different. There's still a little bit of infighting between people that are like, oh, I really like Angular 1 and oh, I really like Angular 2. So again, I think a big part of it is the size of the project. I think if you have Angular 1 is probably faster for prototyping in a quick, smaller project. Whereas Angular 2, I feel like once you start to get to size, I think you're going to see a lot of the advantages of Angular 2. I think there's probably a community for both. I think Angular 2 is going to get more and more popular. Angular 1 is still going to hang around, if not, for no other reason than because it's just like it already has a. It's pretty much Angular 1 is I think it's the premier JavaScript framework for business currently. React has a lot of buzz out there, but I think if you actually see different polls of people, I think you'll see. So Angular 1 has a lot of business usage already, so I don't think it's going to go away, just because there's always going to be third-party people supporting it. Google's pretty much said, okay, there's all these people that say they want to stay with Angular 1, so you guys can stay with Angular 1, and we'll just keep developing Angular 2 as well. So
the Angular 1 development is not halted.
Right.
So 1.5.8 came out a few months ago. There's already plans for 1.6 and 1.7. So they're still doing it. And with every release of the 1.x version, they're bringing in components that makes it easier for you to switch to 2.0. Because they want you to be on 2.0. 2.0 is a much better framework. But they realize not everyone can go directly to 2.0. Because it is, if you're going to do it, any real size app, it's a rewrite. It's not like, oh, I can.
Right.
I mean, you could run both of them in parallel, but now you're downloading two frameworks.
And again, if you if you have an Angular 1 project and you move it to use the components or component object, so basically, if you have almost no controllers and directives, you just have components, you'll be pretty good. I mean, you'll have as smooth a transition as you can probably have.
So if you have a controller and a service for everything, that's going to be a lot trickier.
Services move over pretty easily.
Yeah.
Okay, so service.
Yeah, services are still there.
Right. So services being general, like.
Paradigm is closer to what's in Angular 2. But I think most of us use factories because that was the recommendation before, right?
Yeah.
But they both end up being classes. You just end up saying your factory. I think it's like every time, like you create an object and return the object.
Mm-hmm.
But with this service, it works a little bit differently. Like inside of your object, inside of your factory or service or whatever, you had to make sure you're using the this keyword or something that you've kind of assigned the this keyword to, because it works slightly different. But for the most part, those are really easy to
So
convert
they're
over.
going more with the service paradigm because
Everything's a
because
class.
TypeScript doesn't look so much like it returns bare objects.
Well,
and
no,
that
everything
sort of
is a class. So your component, your service, it's all just a class.
Right.
So you just take your same code logic, put it in a class, and basically make sure that you're following the referencing yourself right sort of thing, like using this instead of just kind of saying this to variable or whatever. So, but when I played around with it, it was pretty
What about
seamless.
two-way binding?
Yeah.
Talk more about that.
I don't think
Yeah.
there are two-way bindings in Angular 2.
So
How do you get data from? So I noticed you have binding from JavaScript to HTML.
How do you build that?
How do you-
Yeah, that's how the double bracket.
I can tackle that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's no real two-way binding in Angular 2, but you can, for all intents and purposes, simulate two-way binding. Sorry, so it's there's a syntax. They call it a banana in a box. It's like the square box and then the curly brace inside of it. That gives you two-way binding, right? But really, what it's doing is saying the square box means
the command line interface tool like this, then you're pretty much going to need to have Node as on your development machine. But you don't have to actually deploy Node anywhere on your server.
Use Node as a server.
Well, think of it
Right.
Node
You
as
could
an environment.
It's
to run all
basically
these tools.
it's basically a local language runtime.
I'm sure using it as a tool.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
I
We're
could have
doing
done
that
this.
now,
I
yeah.
could have done this manually. I could go in and create the whole structure and populate every file myself
But-
without any new. But then that's
But why would you
defeats the
want
whole
to?
purpose.
Yeah. I mean, if you had to, like, if I go into, just to give you an idea here.
I mean, regardless of whatever package manager you choose, right, as long as.
Well, put it this way, if you're using Angular 2, you pretty much have to have Node, because you're gonna need Node, you're gonna have to get your packages, your Node modules, which Angular is all about. It's a bunch of small packages that depend on other packages. So
So for this hello world
Unless you're
application, those are all the dependencies.
there's probably thousands of packages.
Thousands of it.
You'll get thousands of packages and line up all those dependencies the exact right way.
That's 1,600 right now.
Pretty much, yeah. 1,500 packages.
Now, this is not a clean hello world because I built it initially using an older version of the command line that wasn't using the Webpack, and then converted it over. So there's a good amount of extra packages here, but yeah, you're still going to be over 300.
But this is for development.
Right, and a lot, yeah,
It's not getting deployed.
a lot of these are only development packages. They aren't actually being sent. They wouldn't be distributed to the server.
I mean, it's kind of what we're doing already, is we have Node for all the build stuff, but yeah, I mean, it's a Java backend.
So for instance, if I do a build step here, so it's going to aggressively compile things down and minify. I can do, once it's done.
700.
All right, since D. So yeah, there's a meg of files in the dist folder. Yep. And if you look at what's actually in there, a lot of that is because it gzipped some of the
Our
bigger stuff.
copies of everything.
Yeah, so you've got a little bit. So it's about 800K.
Wait, why so much in that bundle? What's in the bundle.js
I know,
actually
you can-
deployed to the server? I didn't expect it to be that long.
I know one thing they're working on is getting the size down, like that's part of the RC process. The compiler itself is pretty large, but they're working on a step where you can pre-compile your app, so you don't ship the compiler down to the browser. You're just basically giving the compiled app down to the browser. So if all your Angular 1 code, when you ship it down, like you get it comes down and Angular starts up and it takes your code and compiles it on the client, right? With Angular 2, there's a way you can compile it or do that compile step on the server. So you never ship the compiler down to the client.
Right.
And that's going to make it so much smaller, a lot smaller, because the compiler is doing a lot of work. Like, if you didn't know, there is a compiler in Angular. Most of Angular 1 is a compiler. Everything, if you look at the source code, it's like, it compiles like 80% of the code base. And all of that's going to get pulled out, like kind of Matt mentioned before with Webpack and a couple other things as well. All the dead code that you even have in your own code that never
So
gets
it's like
touched.
build on, you get what Angular would build.
Exactly. You get the
Served up
result
to
of it.
you.
Yeah. So there's lots of cool things in Angular 2, and that's why people are so excited about it.
Does Protractor provide support for Angular 2? I saw you saw the
I
ETE
think
module.
I think it's in here.
Did they automatically generate something for you?
I think it does. I haven't actually tried to run that yet.
I ran it once. The testing scenarios is a bit easier too as well. Like if you guys ever did Angular 1 testing, you have to do all this setup beforehand, and then you gotta inject the scope just the right way, all this other stuff. It is testable, but the testing scenario with Angular 2 is
I'm not sure if
really
he's talking about end-to-end or
that's more unit
he's
test.
probably the
Yeah, you
unit
think
That's
we're
what
getting
we test. And then test.
Yeah, I haven't played with those either.
test. Is there stuff in ETE?
Yeah, they put something in there. There's also like you can download the CLI, but on the Angular Angular.io website, the documentation is amazingly good. Like they really focus on documentation, and there's a step-by-step, like help you to understand exactly what's happening. And then later on, you can do the CLI because now it's not magic anymore. What the CLI is doing, you kind of understand what it's doing and why it's putting these files on disk, where it's putting them, and naming those things. That's the route I took to go through it, and it's very helpful.
So the whole idea with this web development is I'm able to say pull in D3 or HighCharts or any of these third-party libraries, which at the moment is just native JavaScript. How is that going to get integrated into your application? Let's say if I want to use HighChart, how do I do that right now? Is there a way to do that right now? Because I mean, I'm not going to be writing my whole web application from scratch. I'm going to be leveraging a lot of third-party abilities.
If it uses the CommonJS loader system,
Which may not. I mean,
okay. If it does, you should be able to pull it in or make it work with Webpack.
Yeah.
That's not going to be an Angular style.
So it sounds to me like someone needs to do some work to wrap their stuff in.
If you're using Webpack, which the new CLI does, it understands require, common, ES6 modules. It understands all of those things. So you can have a mixture of all of them in your app, and it'll just pull them in easily. Angular 2 actually is going to be easier. Depending on how if you did something outside of Angular World, and it's like, okay, and I got to do scope.apply to tell you that something actually happened. Angular 2. You have distinct, Angular 2 is built on a couple of core packages, and one of them is this package called zone.js, which literally kind of just looks at a zone of your app and looks for changes more or less. So if something happens in there, even though it didn't happen inside of Angular, Angular is still aware of it and can react to it. It'll be a lot easier integrating with Angular things using Angular 2.
TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. You can write normal JavaScript in TypeScript.
Yeah, so all valid JavaScript is valid TypeScript. Right, so you can literally rename your file from .js to .ts, and it is valid TypeScript. Now, what will happen if you do that? You will get a flood of errors probably, because you were doing random things in JavaScript that were not really right, but JavaScript said, it's cool. You know what I mean? So you will get a number of things in there probably, but those things are things you want to clean up. You should probably not have been doing anyway.
But you can, right? I mean, because like right now you just do, what if you're saying, so I can do var, blah, foo equal to var, and it should work?
Say that again?
I mean, that's a valid JavaScript variable, but then that's not really type safe. So
yeah, so let's say you had something in one part it was a string, another part it was an object, another part was an integer.
Yeah.
Like you probably don't want to do that, right? It's probably not. I mean, technically it's valid JavaScript because JavaScript is dynamically typed.
I mean, can I just write native JavaScript in this file?
Bar in quotes. I mean, that's.
Say that again.
Can I write native JavaScript in this file right now?
Yeah, because anything that you do and anything that's in JavaScript is literally TypeScript. Everything, right?
Types are options.
So basically, yeah, types are optional. So if you don't give it a type, it defaults to be any type, which means that I can do anything I want with it.
And it does all the usual type coercion.
Yeah. It is literally just adding on types and classes and some ES6 things. Regular JavaScript. But
Something else to look into.
TypeScript is definitely your friend. There's a few things, like if you have already a compile step, then it's gonna be a lot easier for you. Like you already had a build step, I should say. Then it's gonna be a lot easier. You can just add it to your goal or your grunt task, or I think if you're using like certain IDEs, they'll automatically do it for you. But
It worked kind of out of time, but I was curious about like in the browser.
yeah,
That'll probably be a future thing. Yeah.
so Matt mentioned that. So if you're using source maps, you're literally going to be debugging your TypeScript in the browser. Like when you open up the source, it's going to show your TypeScript, even though it's running.
I've never done that before, but that's okay. I'll look. Okay, Google that word.
Yeah, and it is.
Well, this is part of TypeScript.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You wouldn't need source map if you're doing native JavaScript.
Right. Yeah, just, yeah,
Well,
it seems like they.
You wouldn't use
kinda-
source maps with JavaScript if you're like you ever like minify your file, all right? And you look at it, it's a mangled piece of mess. Like
Yeah.
no human can read this, but it's better for the computer. And then you say prettyfy. I think
Yeah.
you see that the thing down at the bottom with the curly braces on the left.
Mhm.
That is going to basically go look at your source maps and say, okay, I'm going to make this pretty for you. I'm going to give you back the variable names that it was and the formatting that it was.
So you have to have the original, sort of like, I mean, like Power gives you both the minified and the.
Right.
Well, you don't have to have the original.
source
You just
version.
need the mangled version plus the source map. So think about when you're debugging compiled code, right? Like when you're Java or your C# or whatever the case may be. That's not what's running. It's bytecode or whatever that's running. But you don't want to debug bytecode, right? So it's taking, yeah, I mean, most of us don't want to debug bytecode. So what's actually happening is that it says, I'm going to mangle this and put it in bytecode, but I'm going to create a symbols file for you. And
Right.
basically, when you're running through the bytecode, I'll match it up with that symbol file where you started from, so it's legible for you. Source maps is that for the browser.
Okay. Cool.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Cool stuff.
Cool, man. Oh, I think. All right, about it.
Cool.
All right, so thanks everybody for coming out. So next week, next will be D3, all right?
Yep.
Signing up. You already put them on there, right?
Yeah.
Put them on. So you didn't. If anyone else wants to speak, it doesn't have to be for the entire session, right? One of the ideas that we have coming up is that we do like a lightning talk sort of thing, where everyone talks about 5 or 10 minutes about what they're actually working on. I think that'll be pretty interesting. I've sent out a sample of what that looks like, and so everyone kind of get a feel for it. But if everyone's agreeable to it, then we can probably do that. I think it'll be pretty cool, and take the load off with anyone presenter.
That's a good idea.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, good job, man.
I can come to you now, right?